Welcome to Conversations of Hope, a podcast that shines light into the darkness of childhood sexual abuse. I am your host, Faith Ingram of Speaking Truth in Love Ministries.
And I am Michelle Viscuse from Journey Pink. We are both survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and we're sharing our healing journey to raise awareness and provide hope and support to other survivors.
We know what it's like to feel all alone with our secrets, but we also know what it's like to find freedom. We are breaking the silence that allows sexual abuse to thrive and using our voices to empower and encourage those who have experienced abuse.
Our goal is to create a safe space for survivors to find hope and healing in community. Thank you for joining us.
On our last podcast, we were talking about grooming and what that looked like in our stories. And we wanted to go over today the 6 different stages of grooming that are listed on Darkness to Light's website. Their website is D, the number 2, the letter L.org. And they list the different stages of grooming. And then if you go on down, it will tell you what to do when you see this type of grooming behavior. So the first stage is targeting the child or victim. And that's when an offender gets a child in their sight, somebody that's a needy child, maybe somebody that's in trouble a lot, or they don't have a good home life, and they target the child because they have vulnerabilities that would make them an easier target. In our cases, we were easy targets because we were in the home of our offender. When an offender that's not related to the child or in the family, he looks for vulnerabilities in that child.
And then the second stage is gaining the child and the caregiver's trust. So not only are they going to try, so once they target that child, they're going to try to get that child to trust them, but they're also going to focus on that child's caretakers and the gatekeepers to make sure that they trust them also, because they're wanting everyone to think everything's okay. So for the child, they may just start encouraging them, talking to them, giving them extra attention, meeting with them in front of their caretaker even, and just, acknowledging that they're special or just little ways. This is just a very soft introduction of, I'm just trying to convince you that I care and that you can trust me. And so that's the second stage of grooming, where they're trying to get the trust. These stages don't always happen in order, and some are sometimes skipped, or they may go straight to a different stage and skip some stages, because like with us, she mentioned we were targeted because we were abused by caregivers. And so in that situation, you're already vulnerable, you're already isolated, you already trust your caregiver. But when it's outside of a caregiver situation or outside of the home, it's important to see the different stages. So the second stage is gaining the child and caregiver's trust.
And the third stage is filling a need. A lot of times this is done with gift giving or flattery or meeting basic needs of the family or the child. So you notice that the child really likes certain things and you say, I know that you like jewelry, so I bought this for you. Or I see that you didn't have lunch today, so I'll go get you some lunch. So those are things that a groomer will use. And part of that is when they fill a need, then often the recipient feels obligated to the person because they're being so nice. They're giving them things. And so that creates an obligation on the part of the victim to be more receptive to the needs and wants of the groomer.
And then the fourth stage is isolating the child. And as you were talking, Faith, I was just thinking of a situation where just to look at these first 4 stages, how do you get the child isolated? So, for example, let's say you're a coach for a team and you target your victim, you pick which child you're going to go after. And for whatever reason, maybe they're vulnerable, maybe they need something, and you are trying to target them. So you start gaining their trust, you gain the caregiver's trust, and now you're going to fill a need. You're going to make it easy for the parents because you're going to offer to give them a ride home. You're going to say, I ride right by their house. I'm happy to take them. And now you're filling a need. You're picking them up for practice. But what that's doing is now it's isolating the child. And so now you've got the child alone with you in the car. And so isolating the child is how they get contact with the child one-on-one. So if it's in school or if it's at church or if it's at a sporting event, everyone's around. What are they going to do to isolate the child? And it could be giving them a ride home. It could be asking them to come upstairs and help me carry these boxes downstairs. But isolating the child is how they're going to get that one-on-one time with the child. And again, it may look different in different situations, or the stages may, go in different orders. But it's just important to recognize, I think a lot of people think abuse is just an abuser just flat out comes and abuses a child. And that's not it. They're building up to get to the abuse part. And so if you can recognize the buildup, maybe then you can stop it from happening and stopping them from isolating your child and doing the actual abuse.
The 5th stage is sexualizing the relationship. That's when the groomer starts to talk to the victim and making them comfortable talking about sexual things, and then preparing him or her for the actual abuse. It's like maybe showing him pictures, showing them different things, and asking them questions about their bodies and different things. So the next step is then actually sexualizing the relationship. That's to bring it further down the line.
Right. And in that situation, now they're crossing boundaries. So before they were just meeting needs and being kind and building trust. And once they get the child alone, this is when they start crossing boundaries. And like she said, it might be physical boundaries, it might be emotional boundaries. But at this point, they are now actively abusing the child and sexualizing things. So it may start with crossing boundaries like holding hands, and then it becomes more and more sexualized. So the 6th and last stage of grooming is maintaining control. And this is how the abuser is able to continue to abuse. Because if you think back over the 5 stages, they've now isolated you. They have convinced everyone around you that they can be trusted. They have met some needs that needed to be met, and you feel guilty, you feel shame about what's happening, but you also don't know how to stop it. And at this point, they are going to use threats, secrecy, fear, shame, whatever it is, guilt, to continue to abuse. And so this is how they typically would maintain control. And everything shifts here because, it actually shifts at the last stage because now the boundaries have been crossed. But as a child, you don't know what to do about that. And you don't know how to combat that. And you've already seen that everyone loves them and trusts them. And they've built that character that they're good. And technically they are good. There are times when they're really good. It's just when this isolation time happens, when you're alone. And so they may use things like, you have to keep this secret. If not, this is what's going to happen, or this is what I'm going to do, or this is what's going to happen to you. And so they instill a lot of fear in the child. And there may already be, some confusion and guilt and shame that the child's dealing with already, because when we go all the way back to the beginning, this is not where the child thought this was going to end, right? The abuser had a plan, but this is not what the child nor the gatekeepers were expecting to happen. So that's why it's so important to to look at this and to think about these stages and to maybe recognize them as they're happening.
And if you see somebody targeting a child and isolating them, it it's it's good to recognize and then maybe step in. If somebody is wanting to spend alone time with any child under any guise, like, okay, he's really, really good at this sport, so I want to offer him special training so he can get even better. So I will give him extra time after practice is over. And parents really, caregivers really need to make their presence known all the time. Like, if their kids are going to the park, even if they're older, just let people know that you're keeping an eye on everything that involves your child, and you're gonna be at the ball games, and you're gonna be at the practices, and you are gonna make sure that whoever's bringing him and dropping him off is there to make sure that he isn't targeted or they aren't targeted. But then also letting your children know that whatever happens, they need to be able to come to you and or to some other safe person and say, "This is happening and I'm not really comfortable with it," because they may be thinking that you're gonna be disappointed, especially, like, when the groomer meets legitimate needs of the family, and this
Mhm.
child is saying, "Okay, if I say that this guy is doing this, then my family won't have their needs met. I won't have my needs met." And then they feel really trapped because they've accepted these gifts, they've accepted this help, and they were legitimate needs and they did need help. And then they feel obligated to kind of go along. And then that makes the child feel trapped too. And we have to realize that children are thinking as children and their minds haven't developed to an adult problem solving stage. So we need to give our kids problem solving tools. And what do they do?
Right.
So you talk about these things before they happen. So what do you do if somebody makes you feel uncomfortable? And who can you go to? So that you're giving them skills before this happens to say, "Okay, I don't feel comfortable going and doing what this man asked me to do or this woman," because there are offenders come in every sex, every, um, nationality, every economic background. So there is no stereotypical offender. Anybody can be an offender. So whenever our kids are uncomfortable, we need to talk about these things before they're in a place where they need to make some decisions. So we talk to them about, okay, what happens if the teacher asks you to do something you're uncomfortable with? What happens if your cousin wants you to do something? So you go through different scenarios of things that the child would be uncomfortable with. What if you don't want to hug Aunt Susie? What can you say instead? What can you do instead? Because um you don't have to do everything that everybody asks you to do. You need to be respectful, but you don't have to comply with everybody. And that's a skill that I wasn't taught when I was
Right.
young. I always needed to make everybody feel happy. And we also need to tell our children that they are not responsible for someone else's feelings. So if grandma says, "Well, come give me a hug," and the child really doesn't want to hug her, but they say, "Well, if you don't hug me, grandma's going to be really, really sad." Well, the child is not responsible for grandma's feelings. If grandma is feeling sad, then grandma can feel sad, but it's her choice. It's not because the child didn't hug her. So we also need to
Right.
talk to our kids. Yeah, give them that permission. You aren't responsible for my feeling. I'm responsible for my own feelings. And if you don't feel like giving me a hug, that's okay. You don't have to hug everybody that wants a hug. So that makes us more vulnerable if we expect our kids to show affection to everyone in the family, no matter how they're feeling, no matter what's gone on before. Like even something as innocent as when your children get into squabbles and you say, "Okay, say you're sorry and give each other a hug." They don't feel like giving each other a hug at that point, so let them have ownership of their body.
Good families and also as organizations, whether it's churches or schools or sports, it's so helpful to create an environment that says we do not tolerate sexual abuse. We do not tolerate it because victims need to know that they're safe, but perpetrators need to know that that's not going to be a place for them. And they're going to know that because you're taking a stand on it. You're saying at this place, whether it's at this home or at this church or at this sporting event, children are not going to be isolated. You are never to be alone with a child. There's always going to be another person there. That's for your safety and for the children's safety. So it's just so important to have these rules and standards and policies that protect children. But it also says to perpetrators, not here. You're not going to get away with it here because we have our eyes open, we have our ears open, and we have our heart open for children, and we're not going to let them suffer. And we're going to do everything in our power to protect them. That's the kind of communication that
Right.
needs to be blasted in organizations. And I personally, when I see that an organization is taking stands and they're saying, yes, we need volunteers, but you're going to have to go through a background check. And here's all the policies that we have in place to protect children, and you're going to have to follow them. That is so helpful because children are children. They don't have the skills or the understanding, and they're just doing what they're told. And we have to stand up for them and protect them. And so even if you're in an environment, whether it's coaching or whether it's school or whether it's church or a family gathering, if you see that a child being isolated, you can just go in the room and stand. Like because of my background and because of how afraid I was that something was going to happen to my children, I rarely left them alone. And I was probably overkill with that because I invited them to come when my husband and I were going out for anniversary dinner. I would rather them be at the table with us making a mess than leaving them alone with a babysitter or anyone because I was so afraid. And so that's probably on my part, too much because I wouldn't want to leave them alone, but I wanted to keep them safe. And so if I were somewhere with them, I followed them around, I helicopter mommed. And again, maybe it was too much, but it was what I felt like I needed to do. And if we do just a little bit of that, of stepping in when it looked like a child being isolated, or if they're being given gifts and stuff like, well, I appreciate that kind sentiment, but we don't accept gifts like that. Or, she doesn't need to be eating that much candy and please don't bring her any more candy, like stopping it, cut it off.
Yeah.
And then also, I think just recognizing all of the stages, because again, that stage where the relationship gets sexualized, stage 5, you're not going to see that. All of that happens behind closed doors. The child's already isolated. They don't have anyone to step in and help them or protect them. So we have to really pay attention to stages 1 through 4 so that it doesn't get to stage 5. And we have to do whatever we can to step in
Right.
and protect
Right.
children.
Right. And I remember as a young mom, and I had 5 very young children, and I remember a couple that would come at the end of the church service, and they would volunteer to take all of our kids home with them for the afternoon so that my husband and I could have a break. And it's like, looking back now, that was a red flag because they were isolating our kids from us, and they were a very nice couple, and we trusted them, but looking back, we weren't asking them to babysit. They were offering us, an opportunity to go do something by ourselves. They would actually have the kids come and say, "Can we go with them home?" So it was, now looking back, that was a red flag. It was grooming. They were grooming the gatekeepers because it seemed like an innocent thing. And it wasn't just one child that they were gonna take home with them. They were taking 3 of the children home with them, or they were offering to. And so you're thinking, well, it's not one-on-one, but it's still, all of them are children. All of them are vulnerable. So that is a red flag too. And it may be innocent, but they are trying to isolate the children from the parents and making themselves, as they were setting them up as they can be trusted to take care of the kids when we're not available. And the red flag in that was that we didn't approach them, they approached us and said, "Hey, we can take your kids home," and it wasn't like we were even thinking we needed a babysitter at that point. It was just they were offering, and it just, we didn't see it at first as a red flag, but it can very well be a big red flag.
Right. Especially if they were going to the children and saying, "Go ask mom if you can come home with us." Like, why not
Mhm.
just go to you and ask you directly? Because it's you that needs to make that decision, but putting the child in the
Right.
middle, um, big red flag, and also manipulative,
Right.
because it really
Right.
should be, conversation between the two of you, and
Right.
not
Right.
not putting the child in the middle. And now you're having to
Right.
tell your child no, and maybe
Right.
the child's gotten excited about getting go. So,
Right. Just keep your eyes open, your eyes and ears open, and understand what grooming looks like, and find out what you can do when you see these grooming type of behaviors.
yes, and if you would like to learn more, Darkness to Light is the website. It has all kinds of information. It even has training called Stewards of Children. I just completed that training. It's excellent. And it empowers you as an adult to stand up for children, because that's what we have to do. And I would encourage you to just check out that website, check out that training, and learn as much as you can, because our children are counting on it.
We hope this podcast is a source of comfort and inspiration for those who are struggling with the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse. Thank you for joining us on this journey of hope and healing.
Please be sure to subscribe and check out our show notes for more information. See you next time on Conversations of Hope with Faith and Michelle.